Module 3 covers the skeletal system, and the skeletal system not only includes the bones of the skeleton, but also the supportive connective tissue that we find in conjunction with the bones. So we have cartilages and ligaments and other connective tissues that are used to support. Module 3, Objective 1, asks that we identify the 6 primary functions of the skeletal system. And I'll go ahead and change that to 5. So there are 5 primary functions outlined on the next slide. And here they are. Support. I think most intuitively the skeletal system supports the weight of the body. In addition to support, we find that the skeletal system serves as a storage depot for minerals as well as lipids. In terms of minerals, we're talking about calcium and phosphate. And lipids, lipids are stored within the marrow cavities or the medullary cavities of bone as well. The third function is blood cell production. The marrow cavity, in addition to storing lipids, also contain another type of marrow called red marrow, and this is where blood cell production takes place. Our circulating blood cells, as we saw in lab, they're anucleated, so they do not have a nucleus. So those cells have to reproduce elsewhere, and it's within the skeletal system, within the medullary cavities or marrow cavities, that blood cell production takes place. Protection, if you consider the cranial vault and how it houses and protects the brain, or if you think about the thoracic cage where the ribs and the sternum and the vertebrae wrap around internal organs such as the heart and the liver and the lungs, they do provide protection. And then lastly, leverage. Our bones serve as attachment sites for muscles, so that as muscles contract, that's going to cause those bones to move, and they serve as leverage points. Module 3, Objective 2, described the organization of the matrix in bone and generalized the functions of the periosteum and endosteum. In terms of matrix, if you remember, all connective tissues have 3 main components. One, we have specialized cells located, and we've already identified the osteocytes as one of the cell types within bone. The second and third common components of all connective tissues include the extracellular protein fibers, and in this case we have collagen, and then the ground substance. The ground substance, we'll learn for bone, is a calcium salt, or calcium salts, as there are several different types. So the matrix of bone is very dense, and it contains deposits of these calcium salts. We have bone cells, the osteocytes, living within their lacunae. Remember, the lacunae are those cavities that those cells occupy, and they're arranged around vasculature. The canaliculi are the small canals that connect osteocytes to their neighboring cells, to the neighboring osteocytes, as well as to the central canal, so that nutrients and waste products can be exchanged. Bone is covered on the outside by a membrane called the periosteum. And we find this covering all surfaces of bones except for the joints. And remember, the periosteum consists of an outer fibrous layer and an inner cellular layer. The calcium salts found in bone, the majority of that would be calcium phosphate, and we see the formula for calcium phosphate here. They make up about 2/3 of the mass of bones. In addition to calcium phosphates, we also have calcium hydroxide as well as hydroxyapatite. So these are 3 different calcium salts that are found within the matrix of bone. Bones that lack calcified matrix, they look normal, but they're extremely flexible. we've already seen a pathological condition that leads to the uncalcified bone, namely vitamin D deficiency. And of course, the resulting pathology, or rickets, is just that. Without the calcium, bones are largely composed of collagen. And while collagen is strong, it does bend, it is flexible. So uncalcified bone can lead to the pathology rickets, which causes those bones to be relatively flexible. And if you consider the bones of the lower leg, or the leg proper, it's not uncommon for those bones to bend, which is a very clear sign of calcium deficiency. Module 3, Objective 3, discuss the roles that osteocytes, osteoblasts, osteoprogenitor cells, and osteoclasts play in the maintenance of the skeletal system. Just a quick note, we see the endings of some of these cell names like osteocyte. Here we have blast, and here we have clasts. We've already alluded or seen some of these terms before. Osteocyte refers to a mature, so when you see oocyte, it often refers to a mature cell, while blasts refer to immature cells. And the other ones we'll learn about shortly. Bone cells make up about only 2% of the bone mass, so there's very few cells, and we see this in connective tissues in general. Very few cells, the majority of the volume of the tissue is matrix. And there are 4 types of cells found within bone, and here they are. 3 of these sort of constitute a family tree. In fact, it's the first 3. So osteogenic cells, on the previous slide, they were referred to as osteoprogenitor cells, osteoblasts, and then osteocytes. So these 3 tend to make a little bit of a family tree, if you will. And then we have the osteoclasts. These cells differ in terms of location as well as function. Osteogenic cells are a type of stem cell. So these cells have genes that are turned on for a number of different cell lineages. And when bone is formed, these osteogenic cells differentiate into osteoblasts, an immature version of the bone cell. So that process of differentiation, remember, constitutes the turning off of certain genes that are not needed by bone cells. Osteoblasts are immature, and they secrete an organic compound of the matrix. If you recall that the matrix of bone is largely calcium salt and collagen, the organic component of that would be collagen. So osteoblasts lay down the framework of the collagen. Once that collagen is secreted within the matrix, osteoblasts will differentiate into osteocytes. And it's the role of the osteocyte to not only calcify that bone, to add the calcium salts to the matrix, but also to maintain the bone matrix over time. So there's 3 of those cell lineages. The last cell type is the osteoclasts. And osteoclasts are very large, multinucleated cells that secrete acids and enzymes that dissolve bone matrix. So in a way, the osteogenic cells, the osteoblasts, and the osteocytes, their function is to build bone, while osteoclast has the function of breaking it down. Osteogenic cells, we've already noted, they are a stem cell. They're a mesenchymal stem cell. We've seen this word before when we studied adipose tissue. And they divide and produce osteoblasts. By produce, that word, the word differentiation could be added to that. They're located within the intercellular layer of the periosteum, as well as the endosteum. Remember, the periosteum covers the outside of the bone, while the endosteum lines the marrow cavity of the bone, the inside of the bone. And these osteogenic cells play a role in fracture repair. So if bone becomes damaged, osteogenic cells are prompted to differentiate into osteoblasts, and the osteoblasts are going to lay down the organic component of the matrix in the production of new bone. Osteoblasts, again, immature bone cells that produce bone matrix during a process called osteogenesis or ossification. What they lay down is called osteoid. And again, this is the uncalcified matrix of bone, mainly collagen. Osteoblasts, once surrounded by matrix, they further differentiate into osteocytes. Osteocytes, mature bone cells, they do not divide. They live within those little cavities that they occupy called lacunae, found within the layers of the matrix. They're stellate in appearance, so they have these cytoplasmic extensions. We see the stellate nature of the osteocyte here. They're star-like, and these cytoplasmic extensions, rather, are used to communicate with their neighbors. In fact, you can almost see a second osteocyte right here, and their cytoplasmic extensions, they reach through those canaliculi and they connect with their neighbors so that exchange can occur. Two major functions of osteocytes. One, they maintain the protein and mineral content, protein being collagen, and the mineral content being the calcium salts, as well as helping to repair damaged bone. Here is a micrograph of osteocytes having had all the matrix dissolved away, and you can just see how star-like or stellate these cells are, how many of these cytoplasmic extensions these cells contain. So they have a fair amount of connectivity with their neighbors. And then lastly, the osteoclasts. They absorb, they remove the bone matrix. They literally dissolve it with the enzymes and the acids that they produce. They're large, they're multinucleated cells. We refer to that process of dissolving bone as osteolysis, where lysis means to break. Ultimately, bone building and bone destruction has to be maintained homeostatically, so there has to be a balance. Bone building by osteoblasts and osteocytes have to balance the bone destruction by osteoclasts. If you have more breakdown than building, bones become weak. On the flip side of that, through exercise, particularly weight-bearing exercises, osteoblasts are stimulated to build bone. Sometimes we think about exercise and building muscle, increasing the sizes of our muscles to accommodate that exercise. What we don't realize is that bone is also undergoing a similar process. The more stress you put on a bone, the more growth of that bone, more growth occurs within that bone to accommodate that stress. Module 3, Objective 4, differentiate between compact and spongy bone in terms of structure, location, and function. In lab, we looked at the osteon. If you remember, an osteon is a unit of compact bone that contains a central canal that is surrounded by layers of matrix. And it's within those layers of matrix that your osteocytes exist. And of course, the canaliculi are going to connect the osteocytes to their neighbors as well as to the central canal. We refer to these layers within the osteon as lamellae. In fact, concentric lamellae are the layers that surround that central canal. So each one of these little rings around the central canal are are concentric lamellae. In addition to that, we have interstitial lamellae. They're going to fill the spaces between the osteons. And I'm going to refer to the interstitial lamellae as well as the circumferential lamellae when we look at the image on this next slide. So here we have some compact bone, and we have a number of osteons, and you can see the osteons right here. So these osteons consist of a central canal that are then surrounded by these lamellae, these concentric lamellae, and the interstitial lamellae right here fill in the spaces between the osteons. And then finally, if you consider all the osteons bundled together, they're wrapped by the circumferential lamellae that go around the circumference of the bone. So the circumferential lamellae, all of these layers right here, they ultimately wrap around all the osteons, holding them all in place. Spongy bones lack osteons. Instead, their matrix forms an open network of struts that are called trabeculae. Okay? They lack capillaries and venules, so these are arterial vessels, and these are venous vessels. And we find spongy bone within the medullary cavity, surrounding the medullary cavity of the bone, where we find our marrow. Red bone marrow fills the spaces between the trabeculae, and it's the red marrow that forms the blood cells, the blood cell lines. They contain a very rich vasculature or blood supply, and they supply nutrients to the osteocytes via diffusion. In addition to the red bone marrow, we also find yellow bone marrow. Yellow bone marrow is yellow because this is where it stores adipose tissue. Here we see a cross-section of the femur. We have compact bone on the outer, I guess the more superficial layers of this bone. And then within the medullary cavity, we're going to find our spongy bone. And this is a really good image of our spongy bone. The struts of the spongy bone, these are the trabeculae, and they sort of form this lattice or this network that allows for a lot of just open spaces where marrow is contained. For weight-bearing bones, the trabeculae and the ends of the bones, we call the ends of the bones the epiphyses. Okay, so both the proximal as well as the distal ends of the bone, the epiphyses, here's that word. And just for definition, the shaft of a bone is called the diaphysis. So the ends of the long bones are the epiphyses, and the shaft of a long bone is a diaphysis. So trabeculae, those little struts within the spongy bone, and the epiphyses, the ends of the long bones, they transfer forces from the pelvis to the compact bone of the femoral shaft. So the compact bone on the femur is right here, and we can see the weight of the body pressing down on this femur. Those forces are transferred down the shafts of the bone, basically. Okay. In the case of the femur, we're looking at the medial side, where the shaft compresses, and that's going to cause tension on the lateral side. But through the appropriation of these forces, we're able to balance out the weight. Module 3, Objective 5, describe the structure and function of the periosteum as well as endosteum. The periosteum, again, is that membrane that covers the outside of the bones. It's found everywhere except within joint cavities. Remember, the outer fibrous layer of the periosteum is followed by an inner cellular layer. And we find that the fibers are actually interwoven with those of tendons to lend strength. In addition to that, perforating fibers, these are fibers that become incorporated into the bone tissue itself, and that's going to increase the strength of attachments. Here we see an image of the periosteum right here, and you can see how it covers the circumferential lamellae of the compact bone on the outside of the bone. So we have an outer fibrous layer and an inner cellular layer, and we see that the periosteum is going to isolate the bone from the surrounding tissues. It provides a route for blood vessels and nerves to enter the bone to feed the osteocytes and other cell types. It also participates in the growth of bone and bone repair. The endosteum contains an incomplete cellular layer that lines the marrow cavity. So again, here's a cross-section of the humerus, and we find compact bone superficial to the deep medullary cavity. And it's the medullary cavity that is lined by the endosteum, or this incomplete cellular layer that lines the marrow cavity. The endosteum is active during bone growth, repair, and remodeling, and we'll have more to say about remodeling shortly. It covers the trabeculae of the spongy bone, and it's going to line the central canals of the compact bone.